Hello, my name is Taylor Lewis. Today I want to talk a little bit about decision making and problem solving, but more specifically decision making and problem solving under two different systems, centralized and decentralized systems. Now the language that I will be using may be a little technical, but I want to be able to talk about these systems in an objective fashion, but also relate back to real world examples. Well, what are the differences? Centralized and decentralized systems share many of the same elements, but differ in their results and processes. For the purpose of today's subject, I want to talk about decentralized and centralized decision making in either institutions or organizations. The literal definition of centralize is to concentrate or to control an activity or organization under a single authority. So think of a president of a company, manager of a coffee shop, mayor of a city, even the president of the United States. Decentralized structures are different in that all decisions are distributed throughout a larger group. There are no central authority that has control, no central planner to direct resources or functions either. What is unique about decentralization is that decisions are made by individuals who have knowledge of only their situation. These decisions coordinate separately but actually come together to create a network of decisions that helps this system function properly and coordinate tasks. So at this point, you're probably saying, okay, both structures have decision makers. One just has one, and then the other has a lot. So what's the big deal? Well, there are really two main attributes that both systems share that from a macro perspective don't seem like a big deal, but once you dive down into the micro level, you begin to see the differences very clearly. The first attribute is localization, and it means exactly what it says, but what is local? Well, the localization factor essentially means how close the decision maker is to the actual problem. So for example, a facility manager of a company has to order supplies to keep up with inventory as one of his job duties. He is best fit to make that decision on what to order as he is closest to the decision being made. That's his job. The president of the company may be the worst person to make this decision as he does not have any firsthand knowledge of the supplies that the company needs. He does not keep up with inventory, so he has no incentive to have this knowledge or to learn about the problem. So in practice, localization is a key component in determining who is best fit to make a decision about a particular problem. The second attribute I want to discuss are feedback loops. Feedback loops are important since they relay information back to the decision maker after they have executed their decision. The information they relay basically tells the decision maker if they made the correct decision. There are many types of feedback loops, but for the sake of this discussion, let's talk about a centralized example first. So a team and its manager are a centralized structure. A manager is the decision maker and the rest of his or her team executes the decisions. So let's just say the manager of a team makes a decision to change a policy that the team has to follow. One thing needs to happen in order to determine if that was the correct decision. The manager needs to obtain objective feedback from his team in order to determine if that decision that he or she made was correct and achieve the results that they were hoping for. If the manager for some reason does not obtain feedback, whether purposefully or not, the feedback loop is not effective. A decentralized example is a bit different and in theory is more efficient. A free market economy is probably the best example of a decentralized system. So for the sake of this example, let's just say the manager of a store sets a price of an item a little bit above market value on purpose to see if customers are willing to pay a higher price. The manager just needs to rely on his sales to determine if this is a good decision or not. The feedback loop that the manager uses is really the market. The market is a decentralized system, so the market determines if the price that the manager sets is correct or wrong. The price of an item relays information automatically. There's no one person managing that price that he or she needs to contact. If the item does not sell, the feedback loop tells the manager that They need to lower the price if their goal is to sell the product. We'll be talking more about the free market later. So let's talk about when centralized and decentralized systems work, more specifically the conditions of when each system works best. In the case of a centralized system, it works best when decisions are made at a local level, as the decision maker needs to have first-hand knowledge of the problem in order to make an effective decision. Good examples might be the manager of a team, as discussed earlier, departments of larger companies, and even the parents of a family. Decentralized systems have a different set of conditions in order to function properly. The main difference is the type of conditions. Decentralized systems only need a framework that allows the system to function properly. For example, economies that lean towards free market decision making, and a new but great example is blockchain technology. In both of these examples, there's no central planner or decision maker, just a bunch of different people or functions that have no knowledge of the other and are making decisions to act or function on their own that in turn help the system function properly as a whole. Let's take a look now at what happens when an actor attempts to control the functions of a decentralized system or make central decisions in a decentralized system. But first, let's talk about the best example of a decentralized structure again. As I just mentioned, the best example of a decentralized system or structure is a free market economy. When we think of decisions we make, like going to the grocery store to buy bread or going to the bank to deposit or withdraw money, do we ever take a step back to ask ourselves how the grocery store knows how much bread, or specifically what type of bread, to have in stock? Is there a guy sitting in a desk in Washington, D.C. who's is commissioner of the United States Bread, directing every single loaf of bread that is distributed to all the grocery stores in the nation? No, that is absurd, and no one would be able to obtain that knowledge, much less make all of the decisions after obtaining all of the knowledge if they were able to. Bread is distributed due to the structures of a free market system. So no one holds all of the knowledge to coordinate every single decision that is made by every single person in the United States. No single person has knowledge of every human desire, need, want, and every single moment in time. This is why a free market system is, up until this point, the most efficient type of economy ever discovered by humans. Free markets emerge out of chaos to create spontaneous order, as do ecosystems in the wild. Knowledge is spread out to each individual who acts on his own interest, which in turn unintentionally determines the decisions of other actors in the same system. So you might be saying, okay, who communicates with who? There has to be some type of order. Well, there is order at the micro level. Grocery store managers have to determine, based off of market signals, what their inventory should be. Zoos need to determine the cost of a ticket entry, so on and so forth. The beautiful function of an economy is that prices, or the value that we place on a product or service, communicates vital information. This information tells the businessman if it is profitable to open a business based off of market signals, which a price is one that they are evaluating. Millions of prices change every single day. Millions of products are produced every single day. Millions of products are bought every single day. No one person would ever be able to keep up with all of this information, much less have the time to make decisions on how to coordinate every single resource utilized in an economy. So okay, let's get to the issue here. So let's take a look at an example of centralized control of a decentralized system. A great example is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States. It was created in 1913 as a compromise that balanced the competing interests of private banks and populist sentiment. The Federal Reserve is ran by a board appointed president and confirmed by the Senate and a board of governors. They provide general guidance for the Federal Reserve System and oversee the 12 reserve banks dispersed across the United States. There were a number of different policies created since its birth in 1913, such as the Glass-Steagall Act, the Banking Act of 1935, and the Monetary Control Act of 1980. The Federal Reserve has created centrally controlled rules around a decentralized structure, which is the U.S. economy. That, contrary to popular belief, has eventually led us to several devastating financial crises. So at this point, hopefully I haven't lost you, but in case I did, just hold tight. Let's talk about the central control unit from an objective point of view. Ultimately, the Federal Reserve creates rules that attempt to govern and control the monetary system, which, remember, is a decentralized system. Remember that decentralized systems are created out of spontaneous order. No one can control or govern these systems. Decisions are made by independent actors that have no knowledge of the other actors' decisions or knowledge. So knowledge is dispersed across consumers, and our individual actions, so purchasing or not purchasing products, send signals in an economy. One of the most important decisions that the Federal Reserve makes is what the interest rate of money is. To explain, the interest rate is just a price. It is the price of money, so the price of what we as consumers are willing to pay to borrow money. Remember that a price communicates knowledge that is not held by one person, but in this case, by 350 million people. So if we take a step back and look at this decision structure, we observe that we have a central institution that has control by law, making decisions about a function of a decentralized system that the decision makers have no knowledge of, much less an effective feedback loop about. But why is control of interest rates a problem? Interest rates need to be controlled to provide stimulus and relief in hard times, right? How does this control of an interest rate affect the decentralized system we call an economy? So in theory, this is how it would work. During a depression, the Fed would lower interest rates and increase the money supply in hopes of increasing consumer spending to, quote, turn the economy on. But this is actually the exact opposite of what should happen, and the Fed's action actually prolongs the depression and usually makes it worse. By expanding the money supply and artificially lowering interest rates, which remember is a price that should not be controlled, it sends the wrong signals to consumers about the actual price of money and about the actual health of the economy. During the process, the Fed creates what is called the boom-bust cycle. The dot-com bubble of 1999 and the financial crash of 2008 are two examples of what happens during the bust. This boom and bust cycle, as described by the Austrian business cycle theory, is when excessive growth in bank credit due to artificially low interest rates set by the Federal Reserve result in volatile and unstable imbalances between savings and investment. According to this theory, the business cycle unfolds in the following way. Low interest rates tend to stimulate borrowing from the banking system, which leads to an increase in capital spending funded by newly created money by the central bank. This boom in the money supply results in widespread malinvestment. Malinvestment basically means that investments are made that otherwise would not have been made if there was no newly created money to invest. The correction of this error is known as the bust, which is usually a recession or sometimes worse, a depression. In a normal free market economy with no central bank to increase the money supply or to artificially lower or raise the interest rate, recessions would happen more often, but at a smaller scale in theory. In an economy with no central bank to control uncontrollable functions of the system, a recession or depression is normal. It is the corrective function of this decentralized system. It corrects errors that were made during the boom cycle, which in turn helps the economy heal and promotes future real growth. So judging from an objective point of view, decentralized systems have their own incentives and disincentives that are independently created through spontaneous order. Attempting to control these decisions skews the incentives that help operate a decentralized system and ultimately creates more errors than would otherwise have been made. So how do all of these technical terms and mumbo jumbo relate to the real world? Well, ultimately we have to create centralized structures as humans. We're not evolved enough yet to fully rely on decentralized systems. Most of the centralized structures that we depend on are organizations and institutions that are mostly hierarchical in nature. So can we learn from decentralized systems? What can we learn from interfering with decentralized systems to apply to our centrally planned systems and structures? We can first start by making our created centralized systems and structures as decentralized as possible in order to gain from decentralized systems functions. Organizationally, this means smaller teams, less top-down, more bottom-up decisions. Smaller teams will enable organizations to effectively receive feedback from team members through feedback loops. Less top-down hierarchy will create dispersed knowledge and a more level structure to ensure decisions are made as local as possible to the problem. This in turn will create effective feedback loops to address problems at the source. Decisions will be made by those closest to the problem, who also reap the rewards or consequences of their decision. In short, be open to feedback and only attempt to solve problems that you are knowledgeable about, or you might end up making the problem worse. Thank you.